Very much. We'll keep the wheels moving and move now to the National Land Transport Program, which was approved by the NZTA Board and released on the 2nd of September. Auckland's allocation from the fund is approximately $500 million, 564 million less than we requested and what we put in the LTP. But we're still proposing to spend $3.9 billion on transport over the next 3 years, more money than ever before. So it's not exactly an austerity budget. The report recommends we retain the full LTP allocation of $2.2 billion of Auckland Council funding for transport while still making progress, allowing Auckland Transport to get on with speeding up the traffic and buses, fixing our roads, etc. Existing funds are reallocated towards the highest priority projects according to the priorities we set out in the LTP. This has been a very good collaborative process between Auckland Council and Auckland Transport. They both worked very quickly to come up with options for us all to consider and a final proposal. We've workshopped this twice and staff are recommending option 4C, following our direction at the workshop, which seemed to me, as well as most of my colleagues, as being the best option given the circumstances. Councillors, there have been some tough choices and inevitably a number of projects we would have preferred to see progress will not progress in the next 3 years, but that's the reality of receiving $500 million less in funding, and no one is in the mood for more rates increases. So due to the budget changes, Auckland Transport will need to modify the SOI this year, and staff are also recommending that we have extra oversight on projects Council is now fully funding. So I now welcome to the table Robert, Michael, and welcome back Pramod to open this item further. Thank you.
Excuse me. Good morning, councillors. Kia ora koutou. Oh, wrong one. Okay. Right, here we go. So we have a reasonably quick presentation for you today that recaps some of the material that we presented in the workshop 2 weeks ago. And we'll start with the how we got to here today. So you recall back in May, of course, the LTP was approving a capital budget of $4.5 billion over the next 3 years for Auckland Transport. That was reiterated through the RLTP, which you endorsed in July, and then the government's announcements through its National Land Transport Program were made in August. Then we had the workshop 2 weeks ago, where we presented to you some options to how we may seek to mitigate some of the impacts of decisions made through the NLTP. And here we are today to make decisions on that. So we did receive some feedback from some councillors at the workshop, just seeking a little more clarity around these options and how they were presented. So we'll present these options again, but trying to do it in a different way to hopefully step you through it to make it a little more a little clearer where we're getting to. So as the Deputy Mayor mentioned, $564 million less was announced by the government compared to what we had sought through the RLTP. That means council match funding of around $480 million now no longer is now no longer match funded by funds from the NLTF, the National Land Transport Fund. So what we're here today is to seek a decision from you on what to do with that $480 million. And to step you through the options. So this is where we started with the LTP baseline. As you can see, a capital fund of around $4.5 billion over the next 3 years. Auckland Council's share was slightly under half of that. That's the blue line there, to $184 million. The NLTP, decisions made by the government, as I say, resulted in a $564 million shortfall compared to what the RLTP had sought, which would bring Crown and NZTA funding down to around $1.7 billion, creating a total program of $3.9 billion. And there's that 564 million shortfall there, and the $480 million of council funding that was matched to that money from the NLTF that didn't eventuate. So one option is to withdraw that 480 million from the transport, what's available for transport over the next 3 years, and that would amount to result in a slightly more than $1 billion shortfall compared to what the RLTP had sought, and overall a $3.5 billion program, as you can see in that box in the red on the top left. And just to clarify that, where that slightly more than $1 billion comes from, 480 of council money, 564 from NLTF. The other option is to retain that 480 million of council funding, which will result in a $3.9 billion program, as you can see there on the left. So the question for councillors today is what to do with that 480 million. Should it be retained in the transport? And if so, do you support the recommended option 4C for the way in which it is allocated, or should that money be used to provide additional rates relief? So as per the workshop, we had provided you with 4 options in this regard. Option 1 we've just been through. Withdraw that 480 million from transport, use it for rates relief, and Michael will tell you the impact of that in a minute. Option 2, fund only those items that are deemed absolutely essential, and this amounts to about $65 million, and that would result in 415 million being available for rates relief. Option 3, halfway house, use around half of that 480 million for transport, the rest to be provided for rates relief. And option 4, which is the recommended option from staff and has also been endorsed by the Auckland Transport Board, is to retain the full 480 million for the transport program. And you can see on the right there, every single one of these options obviously results in a reduced transport program compared to what was put forward in the RLTP and compared to as endorsed by yourselves. So none of these options are as good as what we had envisaged in the RLTP, but as I say, options 2 to 4 mitigate that to some extent, and of those, option 4 is our recommended option, and it's certainly the strong direction that we received from you in the workshop was to explore option 4 in more detail. And the reason, one of the main reasons why we recommended option 4 above the others is because a lot of the areas of shortfall are in areas of kind of smaller to medium-sized projects that typically deliver high value, and by retaining council investment in these programs at the envisaged levels, it will enable AT to maintain a pipeline, not a pipeline as great as would have been hoped under the RLTP, but nevertheless a pipeline of forward projects and retain all the, or at least some of the resources and skills and expertise necessary to develop the program in the future. So without this funding, if we were to revert to option 1, then that has serious long-term implications for Auckland Transport's program that will extend beyond the 3 years in terms of the skills lost, the momentum on projects lost, and so on. So hence our recommendation for option 4. Now Michael will just talk to you about the rates impact of that.
Kia ora. So just as noted in the workshop, staff have modelled at a high level the consequential operating impacts of each option. It's important to note that the actual results will depend on the specific projects that are impacted, but you know we've modelled this at a high level. As Robert said, all options involve reduced investment and therefore reduced ongoing operating costs. And as you can see from the table there, you know, under option 1, with the greatest reduction in investment in transport infrastructure, you have ongoing operating costs reducing by up to 50 million by the 4th year of the long-term plan, and under option 4, that ongoing operating cost reductions, 16 million. So it's important to note that operating cost impacts from this would be just one. From this decision would just be one factor that would be one input into the group budgeting process, and any operating cost reductions from this would need to be weighed up against cost pressures or reductions in other parts of the group. But just for context, this slide here, which was also shown at the workshop, just shows how those cost changes would impact rates increases if they were the only factor at play. And as you can see from option 1, with a large reduction in transport investment, you could have lower rates increases by around 5 to 7%. And under option 4, which has the more modest reduction in transport investment, those rates reductions would be around 0.1 to 0.2% difference. Now, again, this would just be one input into your budgeting decisions, and you'd have a lot other things at play as we work through building up the annual budget for each of these years.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning, everyone. So I won't go into a lot of detail in terms of the numbers because both Robert's covered that quite well already under the different options, and Mike has provided a high-level overview in terms of the OPEX savings as well. So, yep, quite rightly, obviously option 1 does provide you some small OPEX savings going forward if this was the only factor we were looking at, but in terms of implications, they are quite large for the Auckland Transport Program. So if 480 million of co-funded, well, Auckland Council funding was removed, a wide range of implications would arise in areas like road safety, no ability to provide small network improvements in response to community concerns, slow improvement in walking and cycling, and as Robert mentioned, there'd also be an impact on the future pipeline. The other key thing is that there's some essential investment required for CRL Day 1 that would not be able to take place under option 1. Option 2 allows the essential investment in CRL Day 1, but that's about the only additional increase you get, but a lot of the other implications are very similar to option 1 around the impacts on safety and community projects that actually are low cost but have quite a high value or impact from a community perspective. We didn't do a full analysis of option 3 because it's a halfway point between option 2 and 4, and actually, it probably has a more absurd kind of impact because a lot of projects wouldn't be able to proceed because there wouldn't be sufficient funding to get a good outcome. So option 4, as Robert mentioned, is the recommended option and allows for a lot of the negative impacts of option 1 to be addressed. So things like asset renewals, public transport network improvements, more investment in community response projects and road safety, and as I've mentioned already, supports the pipeline for future projects as well. And at the beginning of this item, the Deputy Mayor mentioned that this has been a really collaborative process between council staff and Auckland Transport, and we've both jointly assessed different options and have come to the same conclusion that option 4 is the recommended option from our perspective. Looking at the different options, and we presented this at the workshop as well, there were slight variations to option 4, depending on whether you took a renewals focused view or under option 4A, under option 4B, whether you prioritise smaller projects, or option 4C, which took a balanced approach, which would increase investment across renewals, allow some rapid transit access projects, Rosedale bus station specifically, to progress in the 3 years. Community response and, importantly, road safety investment would also be increased. The key thing, I suppose, to note in this chart is that from a scale perspective, renewals is a much larger bucket of money over the 3 years, so a small change in that area does have a big impact on some of the smaller programs. Between the workshop and the meeting, or when this report was written, we did worked with the transport strategy team to consider some of the concerns that were raised at the workshop, and so some changes have been made, and some of the changes also have been made following further advice from the delivery teams at Auckland Transport. So under option 4C at the workshop, Rosedale would have been partially deferred, but by increasing 10 million for that budget over the 3 years allows an interim solution to be provided. And also by deferring some low priority investigation planning type work that isn't committed allows more money to go into cycleways and low safety programs. And Pine Harbour's been adjusted. There are capacity concerns at Pine Harbour. However, the previous option 4C had around 18 million provisioned for that project. That's been pulled back a little bit. There's quite a lot of planning still to be done and different variables to consider, but 11.5 is a better spot to be, which basically allows Rosedale to progress in the 3 years. This chart now has been updated since the workshop to reflect the changes I've just spoken about, but outlines at a higher level the comparison between the LTP, which is the dark blue bar, and the updated budget in the lighter blue bars. The orange just highlights key areas that have been impacted most by the NLTP decision. However, under 4C, a little bit more investment can go into those areas. Also talked about operating costs at the workshop, and there's varying levels of impacts. Public transport services, for example, has been funded at around 97% of what was provisioned in the LTP, allows for most services to proceed, and importantly, the CRL services are funded. The key thing is that since the, approval of the long-term plan, agreement has been reached with KiwiRail on the level of track access charges payable, which does create an additional $5 million required from Auckland Transport to be payable, which I suppose the headline here is that the unders and overs that we've got, we propose to manage within the overall OPEX budget. So local road maintenance, 30 million less over the 3 years, but still much more investment compared to the previous 3 years, and we don't see a material impact. The key area that has been hit hard is road safety promotion, less than half of the investment that was planned for the LTP, which means things like school cycle training, walking school buses, educational type programs do need to be reduced to manage within the much lower level of funding that's available. The other points, as I mentioned, the proposal here is not to request more funding, but to manage within the overall budget, and just pointing out that already there is a $60 million savings target baked into the Auckland Transport budget. Just pass on to Robert now to talk about climate impact.
Okay, thank you. So of course, one area of critical concern is the climate impact of our transport investments. What we have done since the workshop is used a high-level tool called RCAT, the Rapid Climate Assessment Tool. We've used this in the past for assessing previous ATAP programs. It's a tool that was developed by council staff, but based on methodology set out by the World Development Bank. And we did that a few years ago, and we've kind of nuanced it since. But essentially, line items, investments are assessed on a variety of criteria and assigned a score between 1 and 8. The lower the better, essentially. What this tool doesn't do is provide it doesn't calculate tons of CO2 or greenhouse gases that are saved or avoided. It doesn't do that, but it does provide you with a sense of direction of the program. Important to note that due to the nature of the areas where funding is less than envisaged in the RLTP, none of these options are as good as the RLTP in terms of their climate impact. So, just got two slides here. The first looks at option 1, and you can see there a score of 4.26. The colours assigned next to the each of the items, essentially items that receive a low score, in other words, are highly rated from a climate perspective, are typically green. Items that do less well on this assessment are red and various shades of yellow. So that score of 4.26 for option 1. The 480 million that is the subject for decisions today, the way in which option 4C allocates it, it comes out with a score of 3.94, which is considerably better than option 1. And that's reflected in a little more green of various shades in that graph that you see there. But of course, 480 million out of 3.9 billion is still a minority amount, and so therefore applied on a weighted average basis, it comes out at 4.22, which is slightly better than option 4C. Slightly better than option 1. So, you've got your recommendations there. As we've said, our recommendation is that we endorse or approve option 4C. There are some more steps to come around this, of course. The Auckland Transport Board will consider the updated capital program next week. And of course, there'll be further work on the implications of this for the SOI, and ourselves and Council will work with AT colleagues on that, and it will come back to the appropriate forum here at Council in due course. And the other thing which we haven't got up here, of course, is that as is standard through subsequent annual plan processes, a lot of this will end up coming back to you as programs progress at different rates, and adjustments need to be made along the way. So that this won't be the last you see of this. So thank you very much, and back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, gentlemen. Just before we go into questions, I will suggest Councillor Baker and Councillor Williamson as the mover and seconder of this item. Is that acceptable? Thank you very much. Right, questions. Wonderful. Debate. Oh, sorry, Councillor Hills.
There was just one question on the safety projects. It's a bit confusing, the before and afters. So what was our expectation and what did we receive through the NLTF?
Yeah, so,
because there's safety OPEX, which is the cycling for kids and stuff, but there's also the projects.
So I'm going to talk solely about safety CapEx, the line item that we have here today, and the overall number for the next 3 years in the RLTP was 146 million. That's both funding from the NLTF and funding from Council. So just over half of that was from the NLTF. The NLTP announcements meant that there was approximately 6 or 7 million was made available through the NLTF, and out of around about just over 70. So that if under option 1, that would leave us with a program of 13.5 million. Under the recommendation that we're putting forward, option 4C, the program is boosted to 86 million.
Okay. The OPEX one, because it's much harder for us to discuss here, we're choosing to put our 100% fund some capital projects, but the OPEX on safety, how much was the overall reduction there?
Through you, Chair. So the LTP provision 27 million. What's approved is 12 million.
And so essentially we won the argument on bus services, but didn't get there at all on safety with the government. with the OPEX?
Well, we wouldn't frame it in being civil servants. We wouldn't frame it in terms of an argument. So those are your words, but I've given you the numbers.
Our advocacy,
But way you're ahead, Councillor.
thank you.
Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, thanks, Chair. Yeah, and I really appreciate the climate data. That's really good. Thank you so much for that. I'm just noting that option 1 and option 4C is actually extremely close in terms of the score that's come back. Do you have any commentary on why that might be, and also whether we had the ability to start first with the climate data and then retrofit the transport plan behind it? That's probably 2 questions. Thanks.
So that second question is a much bigger question, but the first question is, let's go back. Okay.
I should probably have asked them separately.
So the slide here is probably the best way of explaining it. So yes, at play here is 480 million. That is the amount that staff have been working through recommendations on, and that is the amount that changes between option 1 and option 4C. And you can see there the number 3.94, remembering that lower numbers are better in this sense. That 3.94 is considerably better than option 1. But of course, in the context of a $3.9 billion figure, as opposed to a $480 million figure, then that brings up the overall program by a much smaller amount, from 4.26 to 4.22. So that's basically a maths question. Yeah. Your bigger question, Council does have existing strategic direction on that in terms of the transport emissions reduction pathway, in terms of the climate action plan, Te Tareke Tawhiri. Really it's a case of, but we also have other priorities as well. So it's really a case of the direction you give us to provide you with a transport plan accordingly. Of course, all these debates and discussion was had in the context of the RLTP and the LTP, and we're not relitigating those discussions. We're just coming back with recommendations on what to do with the council share that no longer has match funding.
Thank you. So I guess to follow up with that, this is my last one, would it be fair to say then that we're as committed as we can be from a climate perspective, given our smaller packet of funding and the fact that we've got to deal with government?
In the context of the 480 million, I believe we are pretty close to that, yes. Certainly in that context you've outlined, and in the context that I also outlined of mixed priorities from council as well.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dalton.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if any analysis has been done as part of this process, or will it be done after, in terms of the Auckland Transport's current DSI target, now that the safety programs have been reduced and the investment into multimodal activities or accidents and deaths that happen outside of the vehicle?
Yes, that analysis has been done, and as a follow-up to your questions collectively at the workshop, and we do have Michael Brown, who is Auckland Transport's Head of Road Safety Engineering, online, who can answer questions, so I'll call on Michael in a minute. I do have to fess up, Auckland Transport did some really good work and put together a short memo for you on this. It got lost, didn't get lost, but due to essentially us dropping the ball in council, I don't believe we've got it out to you, but we will make it available to you in the as soon as we possibly can today. But Michael will provide a summary for you now.
Hello, thank you very much for the question, Councillor. We've done a quick analysis of the programmes that we have in front of us. And with the reduction in funding, there's also a reduction in the effectiveness, but it's actually not as severe as we initially thought. We are at the moment looking at the programme and looking at the effectiveness of the overall programme based on direction from central government and local government. And we are doing a little bit of a change in direction with regards to where our focus areas are. And through that change, we are able to still provide an effective programme for the proposed funding through 4C, but it would be around 60% less effective than the original RLTP figures.
And just as a follow-up, does that include analysis around the increase of speed limits?
That's something that we are currently going through at the moment. We have now the rule that has been, the new rule that has now been provided. We're still awaiting guidance from NZTA that will be out at the end of this month with regards to the full impact of the changes or the proposed changes or the potential changes. So we are still working through that at the moment. But again, that would be taken into consideration when we give the overall effectiveness of what we can deliver on.
So to summarise, the speed safety, the road safety program currently under this plan will be 60% less effective, and possibly
No,
once.
sorry, I'll clarify that. It'll be 40% less effective.
40%.
We will still, yeah, it's around 60% of the funding, and we are able to show that we will be at 60% effective.
Thank you. And but yet to come is the impact of the increased speed limits.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Next question, Councillor Ferry.
Thanks. Actually, we didn't organise this, but following on from Councillor Dalton, so we do actually have, I think, an earlier version of that memo that is up on Nexus, but it did come in very late, so I would understand if people hadn't seen it. And there is a graph in there on the DSIs that shows the difference on DSI reduction, option 1 versus, well, the RLTP proposal versus option 4C, which shows, quite a lot more deaths over 10 years, well, DSIs over 10 years. I wondered if you wanted to, so you've mentioned 40%, but I wondered if you wanted to put that in numbers of people potentially.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I mean, the analysis that we done was over the year 1 programme, and as we would obviously be looking over the 3 years, so we would hope to try and make up some ground. But as it stands just now, there'd be effectively, I think we had 8 DSIs saved under that LTP, and it would be 5 DSIs per annum saved under the new proposal, which would be 3 DSIs less per annum. So over a 10-year period, it'd be 30 less people saved, deaths and serious injuries on the network.
So to clarify, that's 30 more?
Yes, that'd be correct. Or 30 less people saved or impacted
than we had originally, had put together a budget to impact in that way, which is pretty sad. The other question, I had 2 other questions. One was around that DSI stuff. One was around where the funding is coming from these budget lines. Which line will the money for the central government changes come from? So where is the opportunity cost for us? Which of these lines? Well, I think we've talked in the past about that costing 12 million. Which of these lines are we taking 12 million out of to do that?
Is that a question for me or a question for Pramod?
Sorry, is that around the speed sign?
Yeah.
Remove. Oh, yeah. So I think there is another piece of correspondence, hopefully on Nexus already, but if not, there are some responses to some of the questions, which this was one of that was raised at the workshop.
Yep.
So we still need to, I suppose, work with NZTA on it. They have confirmed, however, that there is some funding that we can apply for to do some of those speed sign reversals. However, unsure about the rate, the funding assistant rate at the moment. Obviously that helps, but I'm not sure if that's fully funded or Auckland Transport would need to co-fund that.
So if Auckland Transport does need to fund it, which line will it come from?
We'll have to look at where we can free up some funding to help that. But yeah,
I think
overall, we'd have to look at the overall level of investment in the current year and look at where we could reallocate some funding.
so. If okay, so who makes that decision? So what I'm saying is, so say there is some match funding. I'm just pulling figures out of the air here. I don't expect anyone to rely on them. They're just examples for the purpose of discussion. So say we end up in a situation where central government says they'll fund 50% of the cost. We still need to find $6 million. Who will make the decision about what budget loses $6 million in order to fund that $6 million? And which lines is it likely, like which are the lines that they would then be looking at to get that $6 million? They might take $1 million from here and $2 million from there, but where is the impact most likely to be on these lines, and who makes that decision?
I think it'll be an Auckland Transport decision. I can't comment on exactly which lines, but there would be I'm estimating, our current budget is around 1.4 billion, which would obviously need to reduce due to the NLTP impacts, and we're working with the board next week to reapprove a budget on that. However, given the size of the budget, 6 million, we should be able to find within the 1.3 to 5 billion wherever we land on the revised budget for the current year.
Okay, I'm just really nervous about some of these budgets are actually quite small within the lines, and yes, if we take $1 million off a $100 million budget line, sure, but if we take $1 million off a $27 million budget line, which has already been cut down from, say, 50 million, then the implications are much more severe.
If there were implications of that nature, like if we do need to look at budget lines that have a bigger impact by reducing the budget, we would likely come back to you either via TRIC or governing body to have that conversation. Great,
that's good to have that reassurance. I have one last question which is on a different aspect. So with the road safety programs that are potentially being cut, and I've had a number of emails about people showing their support for specific programs, hard for us to see at this point which programs may or may not make it through, and obviously there's a certain amount of operational decision making there. But if a local board or a community group, an external funder, say Foundation North, decided actually we'd like to pick up some of the shortfall in this area, is AT in a position to potentially do that? So say, for example, walking school bus for a particular school loses their support through AT, but that local community goes, you know what, we're all going to chip in, and will they be able to access that, or will we have to turn around and go, no, you have to do your own thing? Is there some capacity there to potentially do that? In particular, to sort of keep stuff going where it may be in the future that we actually can fund it again.
The only thing I can probably say without being that close to the team and resourcing and things like that is we'd definitely try and support that as best we can.
Okay. Very good suggestion, Councillor.
I do have good ideas sometimes, Desley.
Great, sorry, I meant that complimentary, Councillor. Councillor Newman.
Are you sure? Thank you, Madam Deputy Chair. My questions are firstly, with respect to the answered workshop questions, I think I asked question 4 regarding the implications for Qatar if the modelled matched funding from the NZTA didn't eventuate. The answer is currently the implications will be considered by the Qatar Governance and Oversight Group. Given this is hypothecated targeted rate funding from this group, are we able to, as this group, this collective now, participate in those governance and oversight discussions? I know it comes back as a recommendation to us, but I think that the implications regarding the NLTF funding affecting Qatar is quite material, and I would have thought that that advice should now come back to a committee of the whole for some discussion. I don't need an answer right now, Madam Deputy Chair, but I do think that this is a matter that needs to be reconsidered, because possibly it would have been fine when the match funding was coming through previously. But now that that's changed, given that this is targeted rate, I think that some of us who are not part of that governance and oversight group should be given the opportunity for a bit of a look-see into it. So can I get some reflection on that, or a commitment that that will be considered for report back?
I can help answer this one through the chair. Thank you for your question, Councillor. The process at this point would be to meet with that group and then come back through, obviously, the recommendations from that group, I guess, back to the governing body.
Well, I understand that. I mean, the point being is that the circumstances around this have changed, and I would have thought that I mean, it's up to us because it's a targeted rate that we set collectively. So, can we get some advice as to how this question will be responded to? Because I don't think that we should just be sitting there waiting for somebody to report back on what should happen next.
Councillor, that seems like much more of a governance question than a policy question, which is what we're here for. So if you collectively decide that this advice should come back to the appropriate committee of the whole, then that's a decision for you to make. I think it's not it's not something that we can talk about.
Yeah, I was comfortable for advice to be reported back, because we do have a Transport and Resilience Committee for a situation whereby the budgetary implications for the NLTF mean that the hypothecated CATAR funding scenarios may have to change. And I would like us to be able to have some input into that.
Yeah, I think we can. I can get your point completely, and I think we can have a look at it. Councillor Baker chairs the Transport and Infrastructure Committee. I'm sure there's something that we can collectively do.
Okay, thank you. My next question goes to the road safety programs. I think some of those programs are good, and I think some of them maybe not so much. But given the impact on funding, I mean, it sort of goes a bit to where Councillor Ferry was heading, perhaps. But given the impact of the budget changes, and if we are to be looking to try and fully fund or match this through a reallocation, what's our ability to give feedback to Auckland Transport around some of those programs, and what's our ability to have some sort of look through into the quality of some of the stuff that's actually being purchased in that space? I think that there are some really good, compelling programs, but I think, I mean, I'm getting some groups coming to me saying, look, what's being spent in this particular space isn't very good, and there are some different ways to do it. And I don't have any, I mean, yes, it is an operational matter. Do I need to go to the Board of Auckland Transport? I mean, where does this, how do we have that conversation?
So Councillor, I see Michael has just popped up, so he'll perhaps jump in with some of the details around specific line items. But one of the recommendations we have for you today, of course, is for a different standard of reporting back to council, a more detailed standard of reporting back to council on items that are now wholly or largely funded by council, of which the road safety program is one. So the details of that are still to be worked through. But I think that is probably the avenue for you.
I'm not so much interested in the reporting back. I'm interested in the input into those road safety programs that are purchased with the monies, because I support funding for this, but some of those programs appear to be better than others, and maybe this is an opportunity for us to recommit some of that discussion to determine whether we have got the mix right, given that we're going to have to be chunking up more funding directly for it.
Through you, Chair, paragraph 47 of the report does note that we will be looking at the whole program and look at potentially delivering some of these programs differently and ensuring that the money is directed to the programs that get, I suppose, highest value. If we need to have I suppose if there's direction from councillors on specific areas that they need more information on, we can provide that. I suppose questions just need to be directed to Auckland Transport on specific programs.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Watson.
Yeah, just following on from Councillor Newman and a couple of other councillors in respect of that road safety program, and in particular the cycle skills, which I think sits outside of that. It's I think operational. Councillor Hills was saying. I just wanted to check that I've got the figures right in terms of what the cut there. As I understand it, it's going from about 4.5 million down to 1.5 million. So I'm just because I'm getting a lot of feedback, I think, like other councillors, about the the benefit of that program, and not just in road safety, but on mental health and a whole lot of other things. So, given the quantums involved there, I just would really like to know if there's any thought being given to how that particular program in the overall kind of road safety regime, given it's operational, is there any possibility of revisiting that? I guess is what I'm asking at this late stage. Thank you.
I suppose revisiting or redirecting OPEX in year is pretty difficult. It is a constrained area for Auckland Transport and the council as a whole. Obviously, it directly impacts rates as well. Again, it could be a conversation through the annual plan, conversations that are, the process has kicked off. So if that's an area that more information is required for councillors, but we can provide that and could be looked at through that process.
Right, Councillor?
And to that point, annual plan workshops are ongoing, and there's one next week at which Auckland Transport will be there talking about operational costs.
Okay. Thank you. Final question, Councillor Filipaina.
Tēnā koutou katoa, gentlemen, and those online, and thank you, Chair. These questions are basic, so my humble apologies. If you could go to slide 20, I think it's 22 on the Nexus slide, which is the option 4C balance option aligned with council. That one there? Yep. Look, firstly, I just wanted to, on the left-hand side, you've got 1RR, 2 PT. Is that public transport? Is that rural roads? And you've got 3UD. I don't know what that is. Can you explain those initially, please?
Yes, those are groupings. So RR is resilience and renewals, PT public transport, UD is urban development, NS is network and safety, and 5 is technology and change.
I was just looking at my transport colleague on the left, and he's actually explained some of the chart, which is unusual for me, getting something sensible from him. But look, if I go to the chart again, look, if you have a look at priority growth areas, and it's just so easy for me, it's got 100% LTP funding and 100% fund. Right now, if I go to cycleway projects, even community response, they asked for X amount at the LTP budget and only got, for say community response, 69% of the budget and 66% for cycleway projects. Am I correct in saying that?
So that is the position after the reallocations of funding under option 4C. But that's, yes, comparing so LTP to the revised position.
So another question is, when do we get back a report to show us the impacts that the lack of funding have on each of those that had the orange? So when I have a look at it, for example, you go look at road safety, and on your left-hand side with the key, it's funding 70% of the LTP budget. But, you know, it's over the next 3 years, so there's going to be intervening annual plan years. So when are we going to get the first report to indicate to us, here is the impact, and we're seeing this, road cycling projects, safety projects. we need to get more money for this, and that will have an impact into the annual plan. When will be the first one that would come back to show the impacts? Because that's what's so important to me, to then justify pushing an increase in the annual budget between the 3 years, the LTP.
So through you, Chair, I think one of the recommendations requests Auckland Transport to modify the current year's SOI, the 24 to 27 SOI. The initial step for Auckland Transport is look at the performance targets for the current year, and we will be coming back in December to have a revised look at that SOI, and that will be supported by some of the analysis or modelling we would have done around potential impacts of some of those targets, so things like renewals, delivery of CapEx, patronage and things like that. And then I suppose reporting back would happen through quarterly reports, and if there are areas of concern where if things are impacted more greatly, that could be picked up through the annual budget conversation.
And so the last part, Chair, so to influence us around the next annual plan, that is what will come to us around recommendations, as in we would, or we want you to consider an increase in this annual plan year, whether it be in, I know Councillor Henderson and others around this table around climate change and everything else, you'll be seeing that impact. Is that what we will be getting back to us? As in, look, we think, sorry to interrupt, but we think you should consider increasing the annual plan for these areas that we know are currently having a negative impact.
So what I was, my response was more around, we would report back on how we're progressing against revised targets, and if there are areas that are impacted more greatly, I suppose that's an opportunity for councillors to understand why, which we would report on, and that's a consideration for you to consider whether you want to invest more in those areas or not.
Yeah, I might help here, Councillor, because it's a bit political, isn't it? Yeah, it's a bit political and a bit factual. So what they're saying is the statement of intent has to alter, and we'll have more oversight on the projects that council is now fully funding. That's statement, that's easy, that's fine. The next question is, then what do we do about that? And that is a political decision that would need to be led by the mayor or us collectively, collectively when we go into the annual plan budget.
And that's exactly what I was going to ask you, and I think the input from the two transport directors on this governing body is going to be crucial.
I agree with that. Kia ora. Right, that's, thank you, Councillor. Right, staff members, thank you very much. Pramod, Michael and Robert. We'll now go into debate. Any debate on this, noting that the debate is now between you and lunch. Councillor Filipaina.
Chair, I really think that it's so important around the annual plan, and especially, and I'm glad that particular slide's up there, because we've been talking and debating around this table around climate change that Councillor Henderson has led with other councillors around this table. We've been talking about our cycling projects. We've been talking about road safety. And from my perspective, that is so important for us that it needs to be at least the information in front of us to influence any decisions that we wish to make in the new annual plan moving forward about the impacts and negative impacts. That's why I'm glad to the staff. Thank you, staff, for putting that up there, because for me, when we see the negative impacts, we need to do something. We all know, anecdotally, there's going to be some impacts. But, I mean, the staff are going to bring something to us. We, as you rightly said, Chair, that as a collective, we'll be talking about how do we reduce those impacts, and those negative impacts is the one that I'm really talking about. So I look forward to that debate and support it. Kia ora.
Next comment, Councillor Sayers, and then final comment, Councillor Hills.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Yes, I'm very supportive of option 4C. And as chair of the budget committee that's just been discussed about for the next annual plan, I think I just would like to remind all councillors that we went out to the LTP process, and there is actually an expectation about holding the rate increases at around about an average of, I think it's about 5.3 next year. If that's to increase, if people want to add things into that, that's breaking contract with the Aucklanders that have been set up through the long-term plan. So I just some caution about, if things might have to be dropped. I wouldn't want to see the rate increases go above what we've already told Aucklanders they're going to be. So that's a discussion we need to have. And I just want to alert people that, if you ask for more, something else will probably have to drop off. But we need to hold the line at what we've told Aucklanders we will do.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hills, you got the last comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few comments. First of all, just want to acknowledge the Minister and the government did listen to us on public transport services. That was going to be hugely at risk if we didn't get over the line on that. So I'm really glad that that was increased based on the GPS. But that's where my some of my positive vibes stop. On safety, it is quite outrageous that we expected over $70 million and got 6, when on paper it could cost us up to 12 million to reverse our speeds. So not only did we get only 6 million for safety projects across the city, we might have to spend double that making the city less safe. And I know the Minister and others will focus on raised crossings, etc. But the original funding arrangement would have cut 26 high-risk intersection improvements, 19 high-risk corridor improvements, 15 projects to address vulnerable road users, and 37 high-risk bend treatments. They're not sexy, they're not pedestrian crossings, they are things to help save people. We're putting our own money in, and thank you to the Mayor and Councillor Baker and others who've advocated for ensuring that we kept our half of the bargain, that 560 million. We didn't want to lose $1 billion of projects, but we are losing $500 million after losing $1.2 billion through the RFT. We've decided to keep our end of the bargain and 100% fund things, like we'll be 100% funding some of our climate action targeted rate projects, like we're 100% funding unsealed roads. It's very strange to me that the government didn't put $1 into unsealed roads at all. Through our safety funding, we have increased and reduced the number of safety projects that will be cut. But as Councillor Ferry says, if we'd stuck to what the government gave us, we would have had 80 more people killed in our city. Under our form, with our funding, it goes to 30, but that is still huge. That is a big commitment to killing more people through this process. The cuts to public transport infrastructure, and I know people scoff and sigh, but it's fact, it's evidence. We were told that you can tell the people that families will go to funerals because of cuts to safety. The projects are listed right there. It's not a game, it's not a yay, we've had these cuts, this is what it will mean for people. On public transport, it is disappointing to see 68% of Aucklanders through our annual plan supported the climate action targeted rate. We are now doing 40 frequent routes across the city, and some of them are the most popular. The recent one on the North Shore Ward has now 400 more people a day using it. The climate action targeted rate was not only reducing our emissions, but also making sure communities right across Auckland and some of the areas which have no buses at all were rolling out things. On cycling, I'm glad we're getting more funding there from our own bucket, but it is dismal. If you go overseas, if you're lucky enough to go overseas, you will see that cycling is being rolled out all over cities that should be like ours, and it's just normal. Kids want to get to school by walking and cycling. And it's proven by, as Councillor Watson said, we have got a ton of emails from people saying there are projects that will be cut that reach thousands and thousands of kids across our communities across Auckland. And some of those programs were around when I was a kid. We will see those programs end, and it will mean more kids being driven to school or more kids being run over if they try and get to school on a bike or walking. So it might seem political what I'm saying, but that is what happens when we see priorities change so dramatically. And we have not seen this before. Successive governments, I joke with Simon Bridges that he gave us the most cycling funding out of any government minister ever, and some of those projects are still being rolled out now. There has been a long process of increased public transport, increased spending on safety and cycling until this budget we're seeing a dramatic reduction. So it is a shame, but I'm glad we've shown leadership, and we will be 100% funding, for probably the first time ever in some cases, a lot of projects because we haven't had the support through this project. So I'm glad we're doing this today, but it is disappointing where the cuts and the priorities have taken away from our communities. Kia ora.
Thank you, councillors. With no further councillors wishing to speak, I'll now put it to the vote. It's been moved by Councillor Baker, seconded by Councillor Williamson. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried unanimously. Councillors, that now takes us to a well-deserved lunch break, and we will come back at 1:45 p.m. Thank you.